everyone. I am Kristen Brophy, Director of Client Strategy at Legal Internet Solutions Incorporated, and thank you so much for watching our special edition of News, Views, and To-Dos. Today I am joined by Erin Higgins, the Managing Partner at Conn Kavanaugh. How are you today, Erin?
I'm great, Kristen. Thank you.
Would you mind telling our audience a little bit about your background?
Of course. So, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I moved to Boston and ended up staying in Boston because I went to law school here and met my now husband in law school in Boston. I joined Conn Kavanaugh in 1994. So I think I'm a little bit unusual these days. I have been at Conn Kavanaugh for most of my career, all but the first 3 years of my career. And I have focused during my time at Conn Kavanaugh on all kinds of litigation, but in the last 10 or 15 years, I've really focused on representing lawyers in both malpractice actions and in disciplinary actions. I served one term on the Board of Bar Overseers, a 4-year term on the Board of Bar Overseers, and that was incredibly valuable to me in understanding what happens behind the scenes at the BBO and how they make the decisions that they make. So since stepping off the BBO, I've really focused a lot of my practice on representing lawyers who unfortunately end up at the BBO. And I represent other types of professionals as well, some accountants, financial professionals, mortgage brokers, real estate brokers. But the bulk of what I do is work with lawyers and advise lawyers also on avoiding ethical issues before they become a problem.
Yes, and you are the lawyer's lawyer who I am so excited to have on this special episode of News, Views, and To-Dos because today we are talking about, any potential conflicts or ethical issues that may arise for attorneys who are building their brand on Twitter now that Elon Musk is preparing to purchase Twitter. And for our audience, this is an ongoing, ever-changing news story. Today we are recording on Monday, May 16th, and the latest news could change tomorrow. So I just do want to be clear that we are recording as of the latest news today on Monday, May 16th.
Right, right. And
Yes.
I guess, yeah, who knows if that will actually happen, if the purchase of Twitter will go through. But yeah, it's an interesting development and happy to talk about it.
Yes, thank you so much. So, today the latest news that I just saw today was that he's put his purchase on hold because he's unsure of how many fake accounts are on Twitter and how many, spam accounts are on Twitter and such like that. But, as news develops, it's good to know about these ethical concerns. So, I guess my first question for you, Erin, is what are some ethical concerns that attorneys would have posting on Twitter or social media in general?
So the biggest concern that people have to think about when they're posting on any kind of social media platform is that attorneys cannot disclose confidential information about a client on any kind of a social media platform. So what people have to think about is that doesn't mean necessarily you can't just, I mean, everyone would understand you can't disclose a client's name or specifics about a client representation. Sometimes when you're commenting on a post or you're making your own post, you might disclose enough facts about your particular case that anyone who's reading the post, maybe it's opposing counsel, maybe it's the opposing party, would recognize that it is the case that they're involved in and glean some information from what you posted, even if you don't use your client's name or identify the specific case that you're posting about. So often when someone sees something on Twitter or LinkedIn or some other platform, and they think, hey, I have a case that's like that, I'm going to throw in my 2 cents on this issue. You have to be careful that you're not posting in such a way that someone who knows about your case would recognize that you're posting about that case.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's something that we as marketers have to be careful of as well to make sure that we're not taking the firm's cases and putting that information out there publicly from the firm's accounts. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think more broadly than that, I mean, obviously this is certainly your area of expertise. when you are, as an attorney, whether you work at a firm or you're a solo practitioner, a social media platform is really a brand for you. And so you really want to be careful about what you're posting, even if you're posting generically your thoughts about the law or about particular cases, that whatever you're posting is extremely professional and it's not something that later you're going to regret. And so I always like to give people the advice, whether it's an email, whether it's a post on a social media platform, envision that content ending up somehow before the board of bar overseers? And would you be comfortable with somebody from bar counsel's office reviewing that content and making a judgment about your professionalism?
That is an excellent piece of advice that I think many people need to hear. Would
It's
you feel
scary advice.
comfortable?
It's
Yes.
scary advice, but it's something to think about, and it really does bring into play that if you have any hesitation about whether what you're posting is appropriate, it's not appropriate.
Wow, that's such sound advice that I should probably take on my own sometimes. Like I have two separate Twitter accounts, one for professional use and personal professional branding, and then the other Twitter account where I yell at contestants of The Bachelor and Bachelorette or yell at the tea for being,
Yeah,
delayed
yeah,
every single day.
right.
So,
Well, you just have to look at what's going on in the news right now with one of the Republican senatorial candidates in Pennsylvania, whose, I guess, star has really risen. And of course, what's coming back now is tweets that she posted years ago, anti-Muslim tweets,
oh,
apparently homophobic tweets, and those tweets live forever. And so, even if you are posting as a lawyer in your personal capacity, depending on what you want to do with your career, those personal tweets could come back, and haunt you.
yeah, absolutely. So now we get into, some ethical concerns. Twitter has been this publicly traded company. Everybody could have an account, post an account. There were these controls on hate speech and such. Now that Elon Musk is planning to purchase Twitter and oversee all of its operations and such, what are some ethical concerns for attorneys to be aware of, especially if they are representing one of Elon Musk's competitors or even representing Elon Musk himself? What are some concerns that attorneys on either side of the bench may have?
Right. So I don't think that the ethical concerns that I talked about earlier with respect to social media posts really change with Elon Musk if Elon Musk were to succeed in his acquisition of Twitter. I think what will come into play is what we're seeing now with respect to law firms and lawyers, for example, doing work in Russia and doing work with Russian companies. So, to me, that situation, it seems like much more of a black and white situation where there aren't really competing principles at stake that would justify a lawyer, would give the lawyer a basis to say, well, I'm staying with this client, staying with this business, because there's a lot of gray area here about who's in the right and who's in the wrong. Russia doesn't seem to really present that type of situation. And so you see a lot of firms pulling out of Russia, pulling away from Russian clients. I think the situation with Twitter will be different, even if Elon Musk's purchase goes through, because what Elon Musk is talking about and will be talking about is free speech. And so that's an issue on which a lot of people have very different views about the limits of free speech and what does free speech mean in our democracy and on a platform like Twitter. But because there are those different views, I think it's certainly a situation where lawyers and law firms could say, could see that have no problem in continuing to represent Elon Musk or his companies, or even Twitter, posting on Twitter, because there are a lot of competing concerns, and a lot of people would be of the view that get that hate speech out there, because if you are not putting it on a public platform like Twitter, it's still taking place. It's just taking place on the dark web somewhere. So I think that you're not going to see, I think, a vast movement away from Twitter. And I don't think, I mean, again, you're the marketer. I don't actually tend to do a lot of marketing on Twitter. I'm more posting on LinkedIn. But I think for people who have found Twitter to be a really successful vehicle for them, I think they're going to continue to use Twitter, even if Elon Musk changes the way the platform is operated and lets different voices back on Twitter that Twitter has decided to ban, because I think there are those competing principles, and some people feel that the principle of free speech really trumps, uh, no, I guess pun intended,
Mhm.
what those other principles that a lot of people have been advocating for, which is keeping off the hate speech, or trying to to regulate that, and which I think is a very challenging thing to do. I will say one of the things you mentioned at the beginning, that Elon Musk is now, I think, using to try to get out of the offer for Twitter. I think it has a lot more to do with the stock market, but what he's pointing to is the number of bots on Twitter. And that may actually be an improvement if there's actually an effective way to get bots off Twitter. Because if I were, using that social media platform, I would be very concerned about that. That you are, to the extent you are posting, maybe it turns out you're not even posting on a real person, in response to a real person's tweet.
Right, yeah, and we're seeing a lot of that happen, not just on Twitter, but everywhere. I've seen bots come into my personal messages on LinkedIn, and I've seen bots email me with, the form fill emails like, "Dear customer, how are you today? Here's our great product," but it's not personalized at all. And I guess that would be a much needed improvement to get rid of some of the bots.
Right.
And Elon Musk saying, "Oh, this is maybe my way to back out." I don't know. It just seems a little fishy to me, I suppose, but a decent improvement, a very good improvement to get rid of all of those bots for sure.
Right. Right. So that's my view, is that even if it ends up that Elon Musk is the owner of Twitter and changes the way the platform is regulated, I don't see a vast movement away from Twitter. Now, it could be, I mean, as you know from doing marketing, people's, things do change, and it could be that another platform develops that ends up being a much more successful marketing tool than Twitter. But I don't see people moving away from it just because of who owns the platform. Um, and I don't see law firms deciding to keep their lawyers off of it.
And that's interesting. We advise our clients all the time, or recommend to our clients all the time, that having your visibility on different platforms as part of a comprehensive digital marketing strategy. So Twitter, for example, is one of those platforms, and we'll say you can say things on Twitter that maybe you're not saying on other platforms, because it's such an open source platform with very short little snippets. You can only have 280 characters. There's only certain types of media that can be on there. And, should we continue to recommend the use of Twitter as part of our comprehensive marketing strategy now that it might be this different platform under Elon Musk's ownership?
I don't really see that much of a change in terms of what most lawyers will be doing. I think the one thing that's a little bit different about Twitter, and maybe a little more dangerous in terms of a lawyer's brand, is that, for all the reasons you said, it's a very quick hit. And so I think the way a lot of people use Twitter to retweet other content can be challenging, because you don't necessarily know everything about the content that you're retweeting, and
Mm.
the where the what other tweets that particular author might have authored. So it looks like you are actually pushing out content from someone who turns out to be some kind of a troll, or someone who has on other occasions posted content that's really offensive. It seems like it's just quicker to do that than it is to kind of log into LinkedIn. And I think you have a much greater visibility when you're looking at content that people post on LinkedIn to that person's whole profile and bio. And again, it seems like, because you're actually in a situation where you're being asked to post more content, that perhaps you're being a little more thoughtful and you're thinking about the content a little more. Um, so that's where I see differences and maybe some potential issues with Twitter. But I think if you stay away from, try to stay away from posters who are obviously posting content that's very controversial. Most of the tweeting that lawyers are doing is still going to be fine.
So, and that kind of brings me to a follow up question. I noticed that Twitter is putting some safeguards in place where you retweet maybe a news article that someone shared, and it will give you a pop-up saying, "Would you like to read this article before you share it?" Because it has that sense of, "Oh, you didn't click on this, but you're hitting retweet anyway." What are some of the issues if people are retweeting these articles without reading them? Could that fall to the attorneys, or could that fall to liability for those attorneys and have it fall on them if they are retweeting this content without reading it first?
Right. Well, I think it's more less an issue again of liability or even, an ethical issue than it is a branding issue. So I think if you're retweeting content without reading that content, that certainly can get you into trouble because you have no idea what thoughts are being expressed at the very end of that article. So I do think, I mean, it's interesting. I'm not on Twitter, so I didn't know about that pop-up, but that seems like a very good idea. Again, it's sort of like a little tiny break that says, is there a question about whether this article is appropriate? So then it sort of reminds you, yes, I really should read it or just not retweet it if I have not read it. Similarly, there are definitely a lot more features on LinkedIn, as you know, Kristen, that
Hmm.
can help you keep your own profile private and also, limit the amount that other people can see, not only on your own profile, but what you're doing on LinkedIn. And I think, that's another area where people, I think, could benefit from getting more educated about what's happening behind the scenes on LinkedIn, so that you're not inadvertently contacting people that you don't want to know that you don't want to know are contacting them, and viewing profiles that you may not necessarily want those other people to know you're viewing their profiles. So there's a lot more features out there that takes a little bit of time to understand them and to use them, to know how to use them. But those are all good features for lawyers to really hone in on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess to that point, LinkedIn, you're connected with individuals who you trust, and more than likely who you have met in person, either at an event, maybe they're a colleague of yours, maybe they're a referral source. Those are all of your professional connections, where Twitter is this big universe of its own, pretty much. And it is one of the most widely used social media platforms in the world. And like we've said before in this conversation, very quick hitting news and such like that. And you are more likely to come across content from someone who you don't know and who maybe you don't trust. And I guess to that end, if what happens if you are connected to somebody on Twitter and you do know this person, you do trust this person, and you start to reshare some of their content, but maybe 6 years ago they were posting content that you wouldn't agree with and that maybe you shouldn't be sharing. Is that something that should be on that attorney to do their due diligence and go back and make sure that this connection of theirs is, sharing views that they believe in? Or is this something because it's so, far in the past that these tweets were made and now they're sharing relevant information to them in their practice? Is it not as much of an issue?
Right, right. I mean, I think it's unrealistic to think that if you're on Twitter and you find, as you said, Kristen, you find someone you're kind of simpatico with, and you're maybe in the same practice area of the law, and so you're sharing a lot of content back and forth. I think it's unrealistic to expect that someone is going to go back and review every tweet that that particular person's put out there. So I do think there's kind of a rule of reason to it. On the other hand, I know there are situations where even on LinkedIn, where I've become aware through third parties that people I'm connected with have perhaps posted things in the past that were things that I wouldn't agree with, and then you just decide what you want to do, whether you just want to whether you'd like to unfollow that person remove them from your LinkedIn. But I think it is kind of a rule of reason. And I think as long as the stuff the content that you're actually sharing, you've reviewed it, you confirmed that it's something that you, again, is it content that you would be happy with the BBO seeing? Is it content
Yep.
that you'd be happy with your mother seeing? Whoever that person is, then I think you're safe to share it. And I think it's unrealistic to kind of link people to something that person said 6 years ago.
I love it. Those were all of the questions that I had for you today, and I this has been such an amazing conversation. It certainly opened my eyes to a lot. I hope it will open our audience's eyes to a lot. And, as these things develop with Elon Musk and Twitter and all, I'm sure more news will come down the line. And I have always said, put in your own Twitter profile, all views expressed are my own, so it doesn't link back to your firm and such like that. But do you have any final, I guess, kind of to-do items or final words of wisdom to share with our audience?
I guess I would just go back to saying what I said before, that social media platforms are a great way to build a brand for yourself, to let people know what you do, hopefully to give people someone to contact, someone like me, if lawyers are having ethical issues. Hopefully by pushing content out there, I'm giving people a resource to contact if they need somebody like me. But like everything else, it does take time and attention. And so I think particularly with Twitter, as I've said, where it's so easy to kind of go in there and do this quick hit and just retweet content. So you're keeping your profile, your presence fresh by retweeting content. Just take the time to make sure that what you're tweeting is something that you've reviewed and you're comfortable with. And as I said, that you'd be happy with somebody from the Office of Bar Counsel seeing on your Twitter feed.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Erin. This has been great. And, I always love listening to you speak, so I'm excited to share you with our audience.
Oh, well,
Um,
thank you.
of course,
Great
of
working with
course.
you, Kristen, as well.
Oh, thank you so much. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of News, Views, and To Dos.